Hello and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We are very excited to have you on. In this webcast, we will be covering a hot topic on how to supercharge mobile app dev with GitLab CI/CD and Google Firebase. My name is Agnes and I work on the marketing programs team here at GitLab. I'm joining you from San Jose, California today. We'd love to hear where everyone is tuning in from. So please use that chat function to say hi and tell us where you are in the world. Before we get started, I'm going to cover a couple of housekeeping items. First, feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. You can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen for that. We'll have dedicated time for questions at the end of the webcast, but you can go ahead and send in your questions as you think of them, and we'll make sure to get to them at the end. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, you can use the chat function to get in touch with me, the moderator, for help. Lastly, we'll be recording today's session. Just so everyone in attendance is aware, the recording will be delivered to all registrants in the next few days. Our presenter today is Brendan O'Leary, GitLab Senior Developer Evangelist. With that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Brendan.
Thank you so much, Agnes, and it's great to see everyone virtually today. I see we have folks from all over, from Australia, from Costa Rica, from Spain, from South Africa, from Hong Kong. So thanks everyone for sharing where you're calling in from in the chat. It's so encouraging to see people from all over the world, and I'm so excited to be able to speak to you today. As Agnes said, my name's Brendan O'Leary, and I'm coming to you from the East Coast of the United States. So it's morning here for me, but good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to those folks that are calling in from all over. And so I'm just kind of north of Washington, D.C., in the state of Maryland in the U.S., and I'm a senior developer evangelist for GitLab. So I love to spend my time talking with users about how they're using GitLab, how GitLab can make their lives easier as developers, and understand, those use cases that can help communities that are using other technologies use GitLab to the best of their abilities. And, after the webinar today, I'd love to chat more. Of course, we'll have time for questions and answers at the end of the webinar. And you can use that Q&A function. It's next to the chat function that many of you have found to ask questions throughout. I may or may not get to them while I'm kind of going through the presentation, but I'll definitely try to get to as many as possible when we're done. If you have other questions or want to follow up afterwards, you can find me on Twitter at O'Leary Crew, and I'm always happy to chat more about GitLab or technology in general. My DMs are wide open, so feel free to send any questions you have after today my way there. So today I want to talk a little bit about, as Agnes said, Firebase and GitLab together. And I think the best way to start that out is to find out what is Firebase. And as someone who likes to fancy themselves kind of an amateur software engineer, if you will, I was never truly classically trained as a software engineer, but I've spent my whole career in software, and I like to think that I know enough to kind of be dangerous. And Firebase to me is this like almost cheat code, it feels like, when it comes to developing, especially developing like applications for mobile or web. And the reason it feels that way, I think, is, it's this concept of a backend as a service, which is becoming, more and more popular. There's other types of backends as a service out there. Firebase was one of the first, and Google actually acquired Firebase, and it's now, part of the Google platform family. And it's fantastic because it brings a lot of those things that you need, excuse me, whenever you need to develop a brand new app from scratch, but are always kind of the least fun things, right? So the thing you want to do when you have a new app idea or you need to deliver something to a customer is you want to spend your time on that app, right? On the special functionality or the special new idea you have. But the things you always need, like, oh, we need to be able to authenticate users and let them log in, or we need to be able to host the app somewhere easily, or we need to be able to have, a database to store data in and a way to kind of access that database securely. Those are the things that, again, nothing wrong with them. They're obviously very important and foundational. But to me, as a developer who only kind of is a part-time developer, those are the things that are less fun. And I'd rather start, getting coding right away. And Firebase is something that helps you do that, because it brings kind of all these things. And in addition to a number of other things, analytics and mobile tools for mobile development, it brings those to bear really simply and easily in kind of one complete package. And it comes with a CLI that's great for like local testing and allows you to deploy really easily. And as I mentioned, it's kind of based in GCP. So it's in some ways a great wrapper around some fantastic GCP resources, but it also means that it then integrates with the rest of GCP. So when you kind of graduate beyond maybe the capabilities of what Firebase can do, or you want to use something more advanced like machine learning or other parts of Google Cloud Platform that you may need to like take your app to the next level, you can integrate really simply. So it's kind of this best of both worlds in my mind, where you can start really quickly, get an app developed, get it launched, get it tested, but then also kind of make it professional in the end and bring, to bear the full weight of a cloud provider behind it. And so let's talk a little bit more about what I mean when I say backend as a service. Like, what are all the things that it comes with? Now, I don't have time today, and I'm not an expert in Firebase, although I've used it a lot myself, to go through everything that Firebase has to offer. You can learn a lot more on firebase.google.com. But the things that most interest me as a developer that wants to get going on the app that I want to develop are things like authentication. So it brings OAuth or email and password app or phone authorization into my app without me having to write really very much code at all. And so this is something that there's a lot of different services out there, but it's nice that this is kind of just wrapped into Firebase and just kind of comes by default. The other thing that I find really valuable is the database. There's two different kinds of databases, Firestore and the real-time database. They both kind of give you a NoSQL view of the world, but are really quick and easy to use in your app. The other thing that comes is storage. So you can think of this as object storage. So for storing images or audio or video, that's really easy to do within your app. And then the other really nice thing, if you're building a web app, is it has web hosting kind of just built right in. It's super easy to deploy to. Excuse me. And so, as I mentioned, there is a CLI that makes it really easy to get started. It's the Firebase CLI, which you can install. And let's say you have an existing like single page app, or some sort of other kind of HTML and JavaScript based app. It's really easy to then add Firebase to that project by just saying Firebase init in the command line with their CLI. And in the case today of the example we're going to use Vue.js, but it again really would work with any JavaScript platform or framework that you'd want to use, and really could just work out of the box with vanilla JavaScript and HTML if you wanted. And from there, you're able to select which of those features you want to set up. So again, you can set up the database, Firestore, serverless functions, hosting, or storage, and it configures those things. And basically the initialization, configures those things on your Google Cloud Project side, and then also gives you configuration files directly in your project, which are then added in what you can use to kind of extend and configure it even more. And from there, you've got to, bring it into your app. So there's kind of two pieces to this and an SDK for both. And configuring it is really simple. So on the front end, the nice thing about them having the hosting is the client side authorization is very simple. You can just bring a few scripts that they host for you into your code, and you're ready to go with all of the kind of SDK items. And there's also configuration, which this is my actual configuration, but which seems like a crazy thing to share in our webinar, but it's okay because again, it's very secure by default because it's only code that is running kind of in their sandbox that's going to be able to then actually access this API. So it seems like I'm kind of exposing myself here, but I'm not. You could find this actually in the app as well, because it's all public by default. And the security is actually done in a number of different ways. So one, again, it only is going to execute on the Firebase hosted side. And two, for the database, there's a whole nother set of security rules, which I won't even get into in this presentation, that allows you to very declaratively state who can and cannot read and write from the database, which makes it super secure. And on the back end, this is where, I've put back end in quotes here because it's technically, serverless functions, or what they call cloud functions. But this really is where you would kind of do that back end type work that we would typically think of. So this uses a Node.js runtime, which again, of course, there's an SDK that you can bring into your Node.js project to access all of the different pieces of Firebase. And on the back end, you have this kind of, this inverse thing where instead of being deny by default, like it is on the front end, it's allow by default. So you have administrative access to everything, which of course is a kind of with great power comes great responsibility thing, but it also makes it really easy to manipulate things on the back end. And then those functions, those serverless functions, if you will, come with many different like invocation types, like how you want, when you want those functions to run. So maybe it relates to your database, like when a record's created or modified or deleted, you want to run a certain function for every record that's in a certain document structure. Or maybe when a new user is created, there's a set of functions you need to run. You can also schedule functions to run on a kind of a cron job type schedule. Or you can have things be webhooks. So this is great for when you need to have something from outside your app access or hit an endpoint in your app. Has the ability to say, okay, here's an HTTPS endpoint that they can hit. And when that something hits that endpoint, here's the function we're going to run. And then there's another tool that I really like, which is similar to those webhooks, but they call it an HTTP callable function. And so this is similar to a webhook, that it kind of has that same like request response framework that you would expect in a Node.js Express app. But here it can only be called from your application. So it doesn't expose a public webhook for this. It only can be called from within your application. And it gives you all that powerful context that we kind of glossed over from the front end. But on the front end, if you've authenticated, you then have known context to the user that, for instance, is logged in right now. And these HTTP callable hooks let you use all of that same great functionality that Firebase itself uses to authenticate the user, to understand who the user is and what they should be able to access. And then, as I mentioned again, it comes with, the CLI comes with a great a great set of tools to be able to run Firebase locally. So again, this is fantastic when you're just trying to get started, excuse me, integrate the SDK and get something going. So there's emulators that are provided for a lot of these different services we talked about. So Firestore being maybe the database you're using, the hosting service that you're going to use. There's a lot of different kind of emulators that you can use. And so here we can see with just emulator start, I've actually run everything that I've selected for this project in emulation mode. So, all the functions, the serverless functions are going to be emulated on my local host. The database is going to be there as well. But you can also pick and choose which emulators to use. So you might say, well, I want to actually run against the production database or a staging database, the live database for some service, but I want to run hosting local. So it gives you a lot of flexibility when it comes to what do you want to run and where you're going to run it. And again, this just gives you the ability to really debug and run your code locally before deploying it. But then when it comes to deploying, it's basically just as simple, right? You build your application however you're going to do that. In our case, again, it's going to be a Vue.js app. So we're going to say yarn build. And then you deploy to Firebase. So we've configured our Firebase config to know that our build output is in the dist folder, for instance. And when I say Firebase deploy, it's going to take that and deploy it to hosting. It's going to take any storage or security rules I have for storage or the database, deploy those as well. And then it's also going to build the serverless functions, the cloud functions, if you will, and then deploy those as well. And so, again, it makes it really simple to kind of get going and deploy your app. And there actually is an app for this project that's live. You'll get a public URL right away that's .web.app. Your project here just being whatever your project's named. But you can also do a custom domain. So if you go to labwork.dev, that's actually a live site that is deployed and running in Google Firebase. And so you can customize your domain, or you can just use web.web.app, which is not the worst domain I've ever seen. And so that's really valuable. And so that workflow that we've seen is kind of the very basic, getting started with Firebase workflow. I've glossed over a whole bunch of things. Firebase has a lot of great videos that would do better justice to the system than mine. Also has fantastic tutorials and walkthroughs. But I wanted to kind of paint a picture of what this typical Firebase development workflow looks like. You may also be building obviously the mobile app. This was just the web app example. You may be building and deploying to either the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, the actual mobile app. But again, just to kind of give an overview of how easy it is to get started, I think is important, because as easy as that is to get started, a lot of us don't have the luxury of just, hey, I'm just going to build this on my laptop, have a lot of fun, get it working mostly how I want it, and then deploy it from my laptop, right? So the question is, how would this work kind of in the real world, right? Oftentimes you hear people ask, well, what about in the real world, right? And that would be the first question I'd ask right now of myself, even, because it's like, Brandon, you've shown this great workflow. You've shown, how you can get started really easily, deploy from your laptop really easily. But most of us, have to work with a team. We have to figure out how to kind of do a much more professional deploy or a continuous deployment of our application, and not just from somebody's laptop. And a lot of us have a lot more complex use cases. So for this next part, I kind of want to show how I think you can take, those simple primitives that Firebase has and really level them up to a quote unquote real world application. Of course, still going to be a demo application, so I'm still going to take some liberties with what is required, but hopefully this will give you an idea of what it might look like. And that URL there is actually the live code that we're going to be looking at. So we're going to show some slides and talk through how I built it. But if you want to kind of see the end result, you can go to labwork.dev/go/Firebase and check that out as we're going through this. So what I want to build for my quote unquote real world application is a URL shortener. So it's a little meta because I just gave you a link to the URL shortener to get to the code for the URL shortener, but that's okay. And so I call it YALS, which is yet another link shortener, right? There's lots of services out there, but I wanted to make a simple one. I own labwork.dev. It's pretty short enough, I guess. And I wanted to be able to make, these links to say labwork.dev/go and then, some short thing like Firebase, like I showed you on the last slide. So in order to do this, again, we're going to do the front end code in Vue.js, and that's going to run in Firebase hosting. And that'll be kind of the front end of the website that you find if you go to labwork.dev. Then on the back end, we're going to have two cloud functions. One to add a shortened link that will take in a long URL, the title for that link, the short code that maybe someone requests a specific short code, like I requested Firebase for this demo, or maybe we'll just give them a random set of 6 characters if they don't request something, and then whose short link it was, right? The user ID of the user. And then we're going to use this other feature of Firebase that we didn't talk about called hosting redirect. What hosting redirect does is lets me say, for a certain URL at my hosting URL, redirect that directly to a cloud function. And so /go here, so any domain that this is running on /go, actually redirects to a cloud function called handle go URLs. And that will say, okay, this is the short code that's in the URL. Let me take that, look it up in the database, get the long URL, and redirect the user to that URL instead. And then it also, does counting of how many times someone clicks on that or goes to that URL rather. And so this is relatively simple. Again, if you are looking at the code, you'll see some basic things on the page that creates the URL. I just import a few things from Firebase. So again, the Firebase SDK comes kind of composable, and I can import just the things I need. In this case, just functions and Firestore, really. And then I say, okay, for whenever someone clicks the add short URL button, you're just going to go call this callable function. We talked about these HTTP callable functions earlier called add shortener. And so that will take the long URL and whatever the requested short URL was and send that to a server-side function. So in this case, I don't need to worry about the users so much having direct access to the database, because they're actually not going to be writing to the database. This serverless function is going to be. And so I can contain all of my logic and security and all those other concerns within that serverless function that the client has no access to other than to just call it like it does here. And so that's really valuable and makes it really simple for me to, think about the security model of a client using this application. And then on the inverse side, on the back end, again, we're just going to write a really simple Node.js function to live at /go and take the short code that comes after that URL, look up that URL in the database by that short code, and then redirect the user to the longer URL. And we put a couple of catches in here just in case we get a short code that we don't recognize, or one we can't find, or one that somehow didn't get a URL for the short code. We tried to handle every case I could think of here. But as you can see, it's still not that complex of a back end. And I also increment the count there, you can see as well for that URL. But all I have to do on the front end is say, send everything that goes to /go for this, to this function, to this kind of Node.js function that runs. And so again, this is great. Now we've got more of a real world use case, if you will. Again, a very simplistic one, but one that is valuable to me. But I think the next question then becomes, what if I wanted to collaborate on this, or let my teammates collaborate on it as well? Or what if one of you out there finds, just looking at my code, a bug, and I want to fix it and then deploy it, and let's say I don't have my main laptop that I deployed from it with. Or just that, I work in a professional environment where I need to deploy applications through, a pipeline. Well, that's where I think GitLab can be really powerful. So I think that you really can bring the production grade CI/CD that GitLab offers to bear with Firebase really easily. And the thing I think that makes that automation really simple is the fact that A, Firebase has this great CLI, and then B, GitLab CI/CD is kind of built on a number of primitives that make it really easy to kind of leverage that CI/CD functionality, or sorry, leverage that CLI functionality from Firebase within GitLab CI/CD. And so in order to do that, there's a couple of steps we're going to take. We're going to create this GitLab CI YAML. We're going to have credentials so that we can authenticate to Firebase and to GCP so that it knows what we're allowed to deploy. And then we're going to also leverage some special features of GitLab to kind of control how and when things get deployed. So let's take a look at what that would look like. So again, a super simple, let's take it like the first stab at this. This is a really simple way of looking at it. We'll just, before we do anything, we'll start from a node, just a generic node image from Docker Hub. And then before we do anything else, we'll install globally the Firebase tools, right? This is the command that you would use, again, on your laptop, or here we're going to be doing it inside of that node container to install the Firebase tools globally. And then in the deploy job, we can just say, excuse me, install with yarn and yarn build our app, run npm sol inside of functions as well, and then run Firebase deploy. And I just realized looking at it that there is a typo here. I'm missing the yarn build step that would come after yarn there. But with that, I could easily just deploy my code. Now, that seems really simple, but there's one little gotcha, which is that we've got to authenticate to Google Cloud when we run that Firebase deploy. Typically, Firebase CLI gets those credentials from the same place that the gCloud SDK CLI tool does, which is in config and gCloud. But it also can use a flag in the command line. So here we're going to use GitLab CI/CD variables to make this really simple. We'll get a Firebase token, which is a command that we can get right from the CLI. It says login, I think it's Firebase login:CI, gives us a CI token to use. And then we'll put that token in as a variable on GitLab. And here you can see I've flagged it by both protected and masked. And so masked is just a simple protection that says if I accidentally print this into my logs, just mask it away for me. And then protected is important because that means this variable will only be passed to protected branches. So if my main or default branch is protected and that's where I want to deploy from, I'll only pass the token that allows you to do the deploy to those branches. That way other team members, developers, or maybe even people outside my organization, if it's open source, can contribute ideas to improve the app, but won't be able to kind of nefariously or accidentally use this token because it will have to go through the merge request process before that token is passed to a pipeline on a protected branch. And then again, we just are going to then pass that environmental variable as a flag in the command for the Firebase deploy with -- token, as you can see there. Now, the next slide is kind of a wall of text, but that's okay. I want to kind of explain A, why I missed the yarn build before, and B, where we can make this a really powerful tool by bringing production grade CI/CD to Firebase. And so here we've got it actually broken into 3 different jobs. So those jobs we can see are deploy Firestore and deploy functions on the left-hand side, and then continuing down the last job, prod hosting on the right-hand side. And so I had made the other example kind of up before, and that's how I missed the yarn build step in the simpler example. This is actually the GitLab CI file, or similar to the one that you would find in the repository we're looking at before. And what this does is says, let's only deploy those things that we need to, depending on what's changed. So let's look first at the first job, deploy Firestore. Again, before every one of these scripts, we're going to be running the install of Firebase tools. But on deploy Firestore, we're saying deploy only Firestore in the script line. You can see Firebase deploy -- only Firestore and that token that we talked about previously. Now, it's only going to do this on our default branch, which in this repository is named master. And it's only going to do this if we change our Firestore rules or Firestore indexes. So we don't need to deploy a new version of Firestore unless we've actually changed something, right? And so this will help us say if we've changed something on the rules or the indexes, that's when we're going to run this job to deploy Firestore. Similarly, the deploy functions job, which is next, does the thing where it goes into the functions directory, installs the npm node modules, and then runs the deploy only for functions. But in this case, the changes we're going to look for are anything that's been changed in that functions directory or any subdirectory. And so again, we're only going to deploy our serverless or cloud functions when there's been a change there. Then for the last step, the prod hosting, here you can see I did remember the yarn build because it was the actual running CI file. And we're, again, only going to do this on the default branch. And we can also name our production app here so that when this does deploy, we can actually click on and see the latest deployment in production. But again, this is only going to deploy the hosting changes, but it is going to do it every time, because even if we only changed our Firestore rules or only changed the function, we may still want to have a fresh deploy of the hosting environment. And so rather than having a complex changes or accept rule here, I've got it so that it just deploys this every time. So again, you can go see this or learn more about it. I've got a blog post that I wrote about this at labwork.dev/go/firebase-blog, or you can just go to /go/firebase to see the code. And I'd also encourage you, if you haven't already, to get a 30-day free trial of GitLab by going to about.gitlab.com/free trial. That can help you kind of try out the things that we saw today. Everything that I did today, you could do with your free trial of GitLab really easily, and would love to hear feedback on that. And with that, we'll just take a small 30-second pause here. If you want to use the Q&A function of the Zoom client, you can add in any questions you have. I see a couple questions have come in so far, so we'll answer those in just a moment. But if anyone else has any other questions for me about Firebase or GitLab or using the two of them together, we'd love to see those questions. And again, I'll just give 30 seconds for me to grab a sip of water and you all to write down those great questions. We'll be right back. Great. And again, you can keep those questions coming in, but I do see that we've got a couple questions in so far. So first off, Anthony says, many features in GitLab are geared towards web development and not mobile app development. For example, load testing, accessibility testing, etc. Are there any mobile relevant features coming soon? I'm a Flutter developer working on mobile apps. So that's a great question, Anthony. Yes. And I would say that there is a lot of focus, or has been a lot of focus on those kind of generic testing things that can make web development or really any app development a lot better. For a mobile app developer, I would say that yes, there are a number of features coming soon. I'm not super familiar with Flutter, so I'm not sure how relevant those are to it. One thing I would say is that, first of all, I didn't show any mobile app development, ironically enough, in this Firebase presentation. But one of the beauties of GitLab CI that I didn't show off today is the ability to have your runner run anywhere. And what that allows you to do is, if you were also doing an Android and or an iOS build for this project, you could easily also run those within GitLab CI on your Mac laptop or a Mac Mini or wherever you want to run your iOS deploys iOS builds from. I know we also have a couple of blogs that we wrote about using Fastlane and GitLab together, and I know that there's a lot of integration work that was done there, so I'd encourage you to Google that. If you just Google GitLab and Fastlane, there was a whole blog series that our team put out on mobile app development there, and that was from some folks that have done mobile app development in their career, so I'd encourage you to take a look at that. Hopefully that helps. Jonas asks, just getting started with Firebase, I'm a React developer. Can you recommend learning resources for me to get into Firebase? Following some Udemy courses, but wondering if there's something you recommend. So I cannot recommend enough Firebase's YouTube channel. As a user of Firebase, I found it super helpful. A lot of like real world concrete examples that team works through. As a developer evangelist, I am really jealous of it because I think it's like fantastically put together and really, really useful. So I cannot say enough for just Firebase's YouTube channel. It's fantastic. They have great developer evangelists and advocates over there that have put together some amazing content. And there's a lot of it. It dates back to before Firebase even was owned by Google, but even since the acquisition, there's been more and more effort put behind that channel. So I would definitely recommend checking that out. Another great resource is, there's another great YouTube channel. I just want to make sure I don't get it wrong. Yes. So Fireship, their YouTube channel, as well as fireship.io. They have, again, a bunch of free stuff, but then they have some also paid courses. Again, I've learned a lot from their free stuff, but there's like full courses on integrating with Flutter and Firebase, or I don't know if there's React. I know there's Angular and a number of other ones. So definitely take a look at fireship.io as well. But again, can't say enough for Google's own Firebase YouTube channel. It's fantastic. Seeing another question here. Can you do blue-green deployments on Firebase? That's a great question. I've never done that. I'm not sure if it's possible. That's a great question. Off the top of my head, I'm envisioning the fact that you could have maybe, I don't know. That's a good question. Like for the database and things, I'm not sure. For hosting, I can imagine a simple one where you just have two projects and then a different endpoint as a kind of your load balancer in front of it. But that's a great question. I don't know. I've never heard of a team doing that. I would, again, encourage you to go seek out those same resources I was mentioning because I'm sure they'll talk about it. There's a lot of very sophisticated users of Firebase. Again, I've kind of just scratched the surface on Firebase today, but I know like Lyft, for example, and a number of other very sophisticated development groups are listed on firebase.google.com as using Firebase. So I would assume that folks have solved that problem, but I could be wrong. I'm not sure. That's a great question. And I think there's another question here. So can you use Firebase to build a traditional API? That's a good question. I think the answer is generally yes. Again, using that concept of having a serverless function as like a webhook, or maybe just one URL like /API that hits an entire Node Express app, like kind of the traditional, I come from a Node.js background, so that traditional kind of API, Node.js API layout I think that's very possible. I know I've read a number of blogs. I don't think I've written one, but maybe I should. But I've read a number of blogs about how folks, say expose, their Firebase project /API, and then that /API actually is a cloud function that then breaks apart into an entire, Node Express app, so that all of those kind of different API endpoints can work in kind of that more traditional way. Again, a huge benefit to it is if you're using especially like Flutter from Google, or the built-in SDKs for Swift or a number of other mobile frameworks, that you don't necessarily have to build an API. It can be nice to do, but again, another benefit is like the API kind of can be a big chunk of the API can kind of be magic, right? Like can be from the Firebase SDK. And so I would just encourage you to think through all the use cases for that API and understand, is this something that I really need an application, interface to because it's going to be used by other applications? Or is this just something in my own application where it might be actually more secure, easier, and more efficient to just build it just self-contained within Firebase? I think we saw another question come in. What are the downsides or weaknesses of Firebase? I hear it can get expensive when you really get a lot of users and scale up when you have vendor lock-in. Can you think of any other issues? So yes, I mean, it's got this fantastic free tier, Firebase. And I would encourage folks just generally, when getting started, it's not great to optimize for cost, although at the same time I say that, it of course is critical to think through that. And so I think that there, can be a big expense, but I think there's also a lot of optimization you can do. Now, I've never run something to the scale of like Lyft on Firebase, and so I'm sure that there are folks that have done a lot more optimization use cases than I. But I just can think of, for myself, there's a lot that you can think about deferring, a lot of ways of thinking about NoSQL in a different way. Again, these are the videos that I've seen even from the Firebase folks, about the way you structure your NoSQL data can have a huge impact on cost, and so if you find yourself in that situation, that can be an issue. And then vendor lock-in. I mean, that's everyone's concern when you're going to some sort of walled garden like this is. I think that's true. I mean, I think one benefit is the ability to go out to GCP proper whenever you need to, or bring in other services as needed. But I think it's also a realistic concern, right? I mean, it's this trade-off of I like the platform, and so I want to get the benefits of that platform, of the ease of use, the ease to get started. Well, that means that I'm probably going to be in for a penny and for a pound when it comes to, using that going forward. But I think there are ways that you can be very strategic in your thinking there. And again, as far as getting something going, I think is really valuable. And I would think, again, never written Lyft, but I would think once you have a successful enough platform, then it's also then valuable or worthwhile to say, okay, what parts of this can we ensure we don't have lock-in that we're worried about, or ensure are as efficient as possible from a billing perspective. But I would say those are secondary to getting things working. And I think I have time for just one more question. Just looking here at what other questions there might be. So it's a question kind of off topic, but can we implement a pipeline for container deployment on a Kubernetes cluster with GitLab CI CD? Generally, yes. We do a lot of fantastic integrations with Kubernetes. I haven't talked about any of those today, kind of intentionally, because I wanted to focus in on Firebase. But there's lots of content you can find. I would encourage you to look at our webinars page for other webinars on that, as well as our YouTube channel, youtube.com/GitLab. We have fantastic support for Kubernetes as well. and that's something that we've invested a lot of time in. And of course, that's where a lot of folks are saying, hey, we want to be mindful of vendor lock-in, and so we're concerned about Kubernetes. So Agnes, I think, has shared the webinar page link in our chat. I would encourage you to go to that. It's about.gitlab.com/webcast. And you can find lots of content about Kubernetes there, I promise. All righty. And with that, I think that's the last question we had. I really thank you all sincerely for your participation today. It was fantastic to get to spend a little bit of time with all of you from all over. And again, you can reach me at O'Leary Crew on Twitter. Happy to chat more after this. Get your free trial of GitLab. Check out the blog that goes into much more detail and again has links to all of the code that we talked about today. Thanks, everyone.